Hello, everyone. This is Betsy Worthel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the host or station. Folks, before I bring my guest on, I cannot believe it's going to be September, but it is. And September is World Alzheimer's Awareness Month. So I have to do my public service announcement just to say to everyone, if you have memory concerns, please consult your primary care doctor about it. It's nothing to be ashamed of. And if you are a caregiver, I know we don't need a month. We know it. But for you, the public, Alzheimer's is the number 6 killer. It's a global epidemic. Please educate yourself on Alzheimer's. And that's my public service announcement for today. With me today, I have a really wonderful guest. All my guests are phenomenal. And I want to encourage the audience. I just say a little brief sentences about my guests. But I want to encourage you, the audience, to Google my guests and read about them because they are fascinating people to learn about and what they have to say about their topics. Well, with me today is Tahira Rehmatullah, and she and her co-writer, author, Akwasi Owusu-Bempah, wrote the book, Waiting to Inhale, Cannabis, Legalization, and the Fight for Racial Injustice. But let me tell you about Tahira. Tahira Rehmatullah is a partner at Highlands Venture Partners, co-founder and CEO of Commons, and member of the board of directors for Akurna Corp and Last Prisoner Project. Tahira is often referred to in the trade press as the most powerful woman in cannabis. Sounds like my kind of woman. I want to welcome Tahira Rehmatullah to Chatting with Betsy. Welcome, Tahira.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you are welcome. It's my pleasure. Tahira, I'm going to ask you what I ask all the authors that come on my show is, what motivated you and Akwasi to write this book? Because I just love the title. First of all, the title, I just love it. So I'd like you to tell the audience that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you for having me today. I'm unfortunately solo, and Akwasi wishes he could be here, but definitely someone who has been inspirational for me. I mean, the way that we came together, Akwasi and I actually met at a conference in 2018, and he is an academic. He's a researcher. He's been focused on policing and race for quite some time. And when we met at this conference, I was coming more from the business side of the industry, and he was more from the research data side. And we just realized that we had a lot in common. I often tell the story that he spoke at the conference the day before I did, and after listening to his talk, I had to go home and rewrite my entire speech because it copied so much of what he said in a good way, but I was like, oh, that is way too close, so it'll sound like I'm just saying the same thing as him. But then from there, we developed a friendship, and over time aligned on what we wanted. We wish more people knew about the industry and what's happening, not just from the legalization standpoint on the progress on that side, but what the history has been. And the reality is, and I think even for someone like me who didn't really understand the history of cannabis and the fact that it was illegal and how it was illegal until I really got into the industry, and then someone with Akwasi's lens on how much that has impacted different races over the course of time and even what's happening now. And that's something that we really wanted people to understand more, give what we hoped was a digestible background, and then have people empowered with that information as we move forward, because the story is certainly not done. This is just the beginning. And we joke too, this is, for us, this book is volume 1 of probably many, and some way, shape, or form, because the story continues and where we are is really still the beginning. So that's really how we came together, and it's continued to progress in different ways on the markets and what's happening, and we're continuing to see how it goes and how we can hopefully influence in a positive way the way that regulation and the market continues to develop.
Well, I'll tell you what, I have a funny story, Tahira. And, folks, I'm the kind of host where I'm just me. Like what you hear on my show, this is me. I don't put on airs. Well, medical marijuana is in New Jersey. It's been in New Jersey for I don't even know how long. But the thing about medical marijuana was that I had found out about because a coworker's husband was taking it, is it's expensive. Insurance doesn't pay for it. You have to pay, whether it's like $150 or $200 at the time for the card, and the medical marijuana is expensive. So my coworker showed me the cost, and I said, well, Crystal, it's not like the 70s where it was $5 for a sandwich bag.
Yeah.
of marijuana. I mean, it's like 40 and up.
Yeah, easily.
Yeah, for a little bit. And I just had to tell the folks, I'm not promoting marijuana. I believe everyone does their own thing, whichever, suits you. However, I wished that I could have had medical marijuana for my husband, Matt, during his Alzheimer's instead of him taking the medications that he was taking. And even now that it took so long for marijuana to be legal in New Jersey, it's still hard to, I think, to get, because there's not many in my area, and it is expensive. I wish New Jersey would model Colorado or California, where you could go into a coffee shop and pick out what you want, and be that simple and that easy to do.
Yeah, I think that over time that will develop. New Jersey is also a market that has adult use, so there will be more dispensaries opening up that you won't be required to have a medical card. But at the same time, markets are still evolving. Colorado is one of the oldest markets that there is for adult use cannabis, alongside Oregon, and California was the first medical market, and that really operated in a different way than I think a lot of the other medical markets have evolved into. So it's a work in progress. I think that's the best way to describe it, in that everybody's still kind of learning. And I think over time there will be more accessibility. But absolutely, to your point, we wish that there was just more available to people who need it, so you don't have to resort to also illegal products or other products. And the price point also is something that is really challenging. And what we've found as different markets have developed, that because the prices are so high, because the taxes are often so high, that you are then in some way pushing people back into the illegal market, because they already have trust with, if there have been someone who's already been accessing it from the illegal market, you have trust. You're not worried about who your dealers are or the people that you're getting it from, and they can compete pretty heavily on pricing. And so those are a lot of just different market dynamics that have to continue to play out, and they're different by each state.
Yes, they are. Tahira, can you tell the audience, because I love your story of how you became involved with cannabis?
Yeah. Definitely not something that I thought about as a young kid, that this is where I'm going to end up, and I'm sure my parents certainly didn't expect me to be here. But when I was in business school in 2013, it was my second year of school, and my grandfather, my mother's father, was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And at the time, this is late 2013, there weren't options for getting cannabis in the legal market. My mother and my grandfather are in Ohio, and of all things, my mother reached out to me and my younger sister one day in a random text that we always laugh about, and all she said was, "Do you know where to get marijuana?" And my younger sister immediately called me and said, do you think that this is a test? And we both were like, I don't know what's happening right now, but let's see. This is not something that my mother would normally ask us, nor were we expecting. And the reality was is that my mom was desperate to try to find something to bring some relief to my grandfather. It was a pretty aggressive treatment, chemotherapy. He didn't have an appetite. He was weak. He couldn't sleep. All the things that tend to happen with people who are going through chemotherapy or other illnesses. You had mentioned about your husband with Alzheimer's, the agitation, the restlessness, the anger that kind of develops too. It's like there are different symptoms that cannabis can help with in a more productive way than prescription medications at this stage. And so I just started a deep dive myself. Cannabis hadn't really been a part of my life as an adult. Of course, I was a high school kid in Ohio and had experienced it with my friends, but it wasn't something that I really had that much knowledge about as I got older, and didn't really know what was going on in the legalization efforts that were happening at that time. And so it was pretty fascinating to me. And I think on the other side of it, what I was really fascinated by was actually the history. I'm a 1980s kid, Nancy Reagan, just say no. That was what was in my head. I hadn't really understood, nor had anybody ever talked about it. There wasn't a lot of information out there about why was cannabis illegal in the first place, what was the war on drugs, really how did that come to be. You think all of that is done in a very clear, straightforward, helping the people kind of way. And what I realized in my own research was that a lot of that was false, or at least false from my interpretation on how that had come to be and the harms that it had actually done to communities. This was really just a, late at night research project for me after hours. And eventually I just became more and more interested. And so as I was graduating from business school, I just had an opportunity. It was kind of right place at the right time that an early company in the space that was considered one of the first investment firms focused on cannabis entirely, based out of Seattle. They had alumni. The founders of that business were alumni of my program, and they happened to recruit there first. So I kind of threw caution to the wind and said, this is something that I think is really interesting. I really care about it. Let's see what happens. And unfortunately, we weren't able to get anything from my grandfather in his 6-month battle before he passed away, but it was definitely something that had opened my eyes and that I wanted to do something about it.
I can understand that and your passion, Tahira, because I could tell that you're very passionate about your work, and so is Akwasi. I remember, because your story reminds me of when I was a nurse, and I was working in Tennessee at the time. I think it was 78 or 79. And one of the patient's family members said to me, her mom had, I believe it was lung cancer, and she said to me, Betsy, I don't care if I go to jail. I'm going to get my mother some marijuana. I don't want her to suffer.
Yeah.
And I can definitely understand that. I knew my luck if I would have gotten marijuana from that, because I knew someone who could, get it for me, I would get arrested, and I could not. I couldn't take that chance.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it shows the desperation, and I think the desire for people. Like, it's hard to watch someone you love suffer in any way, shape, or form, and so you'll do whatever you can, or we'll try to, anyways.
Yes, and I think that when you talk about racial justice, and this is just my opinion, folks, because I know that if you don't have money for a lawyer, you're probably going to serve the time. And we have seen celebrities, so I'm not making this up, who have been caught at airports and have marijuana and other drugs in their possession, and they get off very easily. I'm not going to name names because I don't want to get sued, but you probably have an idea of who I'm talking about. It's been in the paper, so in the news, so it's no secret. And they do not serve time. But as I believe, and this is just my opinion, but I believe if you are a person of color, minority, and you're caught with the same exact drug, whether it's marijuana or something else, you're going to serve the time. What is your opinion, Tahira?
Well, that's absolutely our opinion. I think one element of the driving force behind why we wanted to highlight this issue and try to highlight a range of others, one of the things that Akwasi says often is that drug prohibition is the anomaly, not the norm. So if you look over the course of history, anti-drug crusaders really took their fight to the stage in the 1960s and 1970s under President Nixon. But prior to that, a lot of these substances that are natural products were available and used in a much more modest way. And then the legalization, the illegalization effort is really what pushed it into kind of the usage states that it is now. And drug law enforcement has been used as a tool of societal control of these different populations. So, to us, drug prohibition really has racist roots. And a lot of laws were developed and later strengthened out of fear of racial minority populations not kind of falling into line on what needed to be done at those different times. So drug law enforcement is really selectively applied to certain communities, which is exactly what you're saying, right? It's very selective. It's not a very baseline, if you're white versus if you're black, the chance that you're caught with marijuana, it could be the exact same thing. And if you're black, you're 4 times more likely to be arrested. And those are ACLU stats, so it's not things that I'm just making up. And so as diving through this research, we really see the patterns and understand. And we all probably know anecdotal stories, but the data also shows that. And if we look at the sentences, the prison sentences that people are still serving, even though cannabis is legalized from adult use of 40 states in the country plus DC, and we have medical is in 40 plus states, and adult use is in 20 plus states. So the fact that it's legal in so many places in one way, shape, or form, and we still have people, tens of thousands of people serving jail time, sometimes up to life sentences for nonviolent, low-level cannabis crimes is absurd. And that's another element that we wanted to really highlight, that instead of hearing random stats, just really, I think, personalizing the reality of these harsh cannabis laws and really humanize what has been happening for decades and make it relatable.
I agree, Tahira. I think that, now that marijuana is legal, and even before it wasn't legal, and I'm not promoting drug dealing, folks, so don't get wrong what I'm going to say here. I'm not promoting that. But, I'm going to just give an example of what I think. Someone of color, minority, whatever minority, is dealing, marijuana, and they serve a severe sentence. And now that it's legal, they should be pardoned, released. But yet you have people who commit horrible crimes, rape, murder, and they're out in 18 months, 2 years. This makes no sense to me. And it really makes me mad. It really makes me mad.
It's very upsetting, and beyond that, to understand the impact that this continues to have on communities around the country, that it doesn't just stop with one person. When you take somebody for selling the equivalent of a joint and put them in jail for years, decades, that impacts that person's entire family. That takes away a mother or a father, a child. It disrupts a community, and that cycle of poverty then can often continue. And one of the elements that we focus on in the book is actually sharing stories of real people who we know through our own work. And I'm on the board of an organization called the Last Prisoner Project, which is a national nonprofit that's dedicated to cannabis criminal justice reform. And they help people who are in prison for cannabis crimes to get out, because it's not it's not straightforward. Unfortunately, just because it has been legalized in different states doesn't mean the people who are serving time for crimes in those states are automatically released from prison or their records are expunged. Every state has different ways that they're doing it, where many of them have not done anything about it. And so it takes organizations and people to actually help those people get out of prison, or make the case for it. Unfortunately, there's still some sad examples of it not being effective. So one example that I'll give is a man who was serving time, was actually serving a life sentence in Louisiana for his third offense, which was the equivalent of selling about $20 worth of cannabis. So got a life sentence because it has still the 3 strikes policy. And the Last Prisoner Project and other organizations work to get his case reviewed, and the judge still sentenced him to 35 years, even though legalization has shifted, and none of his crimes were violent. They're all selling amounts that are likely legal in different places, and a lot of states have also led with decriminalization. So even if there isn't a state policy like adult use or medical cannabis in a state, but if it's decriminalized and you have up to a certain amount that you're caught with, it's a fine. It's not a felony. And so he would fall within those rules now, but that wasn't the case when he was arrested. And the argument that we often hear from people is that, well, when these people committed those crimes, it was illegal. And sure, that might be the case, and I'm not disputing that it was illegal then and they still committed, quote unquote, a crime. But our view is very much that those laws were wrong, that they unfairly targeted people and they were unfairly harsh, and we should not have ever had those be the case. So we need to try to fix that now and help these people get out of prison and get them back on their feet, because it doesn't just stop. You don't just get somebody out of prison and say, okay, great, you're done. Their records have to be expunged. There needs to be support. We have not made it easy for people to come out of prison and then still be able to have a life. It's really hard to get a job. You can't get public assistance. In a lot of places you can't vote because you're a felon. And I'm not saying that this should be applied to everybody who's in prison, because as you said, there are a lot of people who have done really bad things and they deserve those punishments. But these are really unjust and unfair for the scope of what has actually happened.
Yes, I agree. I think there needs to be a complete overhaul of the laws, each state, and the justice system. They complain that prisons are overcrowded. Then release the people who are there unfairly and keep the ones who need to be in there, keep them in there. It's and that's a whole nother show. You hear about someone being released for rape, they murdered, and they're out in a short amount of time. Someone who's just dealing marijuana is serving more years, and all they did was marijuana. They didn't hurt anybody, and it is very unfair. And just to let the folks know who don't know me, I am Caucasian. I just want people to know I am Caucasian, and I agree with Tahira that the laws are not fair to everyone. And, it should be across the board. I don't care, what color you are, what ethnic background you are, then everyone should be serving the same amount of time for the same amount of drugs that they were caught with. And be fair about it. And I think that they need to give people early release. This is really fascinating to hear. And I was going to also ask you, how did you find people to tell you their stories? Because there's fascinating stories in your book.
It was a mix of connections. Akwasi has worked with people in the past or, has networked with people that were able to share their stories. Because of my work with Last Prisoner Project, they have a network of people that they've worked with that have are currently serving time, have been released for through LPP's connections and work with them. And so really those were kind of the main buckets, and then referrals from other people that we've worked with in the industry. So kind of a range there, but we're fortunate to have those connections and the trust from people to be willing to tell us their stories and share it, because you want to make sure that it does justice. And there were so many stories that we weren't able to tell because we were limited on how many pages we could actually write. But the ones that we highlighted, we really wanted to show the harshness of these penalties for people who, they were living life. They weren't doing anything wild and crazy. We see white-collar crimes today that do far worse, and people get far less time. Those obviously, they're not violent, but they're financial crimes or business-related crimes, and people are able to serve very little time or be on probation or have other types of penalties, and these people have had to sit in prison. And not just any type of prison. Some of them were in maximum security prisons. And what that does to you emotionally and physically is something that we haven't even started to deal with for a lot of these people. And it's really unfortunate. Often I bring up the reference of prisons in other parts of the world and how those systems are treated versus how the U.S. treats our prison systems. And one leading example is that of Norway, which really focuses on rehabilitation as opposed to punishment. And obviously they're also fitting it with the crime that has actually been committed, but they don't want people to be back in the prison system at the end of the day. You want them to be rehabilitated and then when they've served their time, go out and be productive in society in whatever way that is. Our system doesn't focus on that at all. These people are underserved in so many ways in prison, and then they come out and they have absolutely nothing. And that's a harsh reality of our system. It's a business, right? Prison in the U.S. is a big business. It's not focused on trying to bring these people back into society so they don't end up back there again. And so the recidivism rate in the U.S. is far higher than a lot of other places in the world because of that.
Yes, you're right. And some people who get out of prison do a crime so they could go back in.
Right, because that's the only place that they have a bed, right? Or
that
they'll have a meal every day. And that's awful. That's so unfortunate to know that people feel like that's their only option.
Yes, I totally agree. There are some names that I do have written down, if I could read my handwriting, Tahira, who I don't have a computer to print out. I can't read my handwriting. Who is Wanda James, and why does she matter?
Yeah, Wanda James is a phenomenal woman who Akwasi and I have both had the opportunity to engage with, and she is one of the early cannabis pioneers. Her family was in the Air Force, her father was in the Air Force, and so she lived all over Colorado, Germany, England, and she really wanted to, after she got her college degree, she became an advocate for vets and the use of cannabis for PTSD. And because of that understanding and knowledge from what people were going through from serving in the military, she herself was a naval officer, so really understood what was happening there. She ended up opening one of the first dispensaries in Colorado. And kind of, what she jokingly says is the rest is history. Her and her husband have been in the space for quite some time. She's also the first Black woman to open a dispensary in the country, and she's a really, really strong advocate for cannabis legalization policy in a very responsible way, and beyond that, bringing minorities into the space in a way that they can, actually thrive in the industry as opposed to be punished. Because what we're seeing a lot of now is that the people who are benefiting from the legalization, they're not the people who were previously persecuted for that same thing. So when her and her husband, moved to Colorado in the early 2000s and they opened their first dispensary, they were the first Black licensees in the U.S. and they want to help other people achieve that same success. Encourage others to help people along the way. So she's been someone who has been a mentor to a lot of people, has been really a role model for a lot of us in the work that she's done and continues to do.
Wow, sounds like Wanda's a fascinating woman. I just thought of an idea to her. People who are in jail, who's serving time unjustly, they should release them and help them start a legal marijuana business. And that's
Absolutely.
the way they could make money.
That is something that we talk about in the book, what is referred to as social equity programs across the country. And each state, again, it's different. Not every state has any type of program. In New York right now, they tried to lead with social equity and do exactly what you're saying, which was for people, it wasn't necessarily people who just come out of prison, but people who had a record, who had previously been incarcerated for a cannabis crime or had been impacted by some, lost a family member or someone else in their family had to serve time for a cannabis crime that is now legal. They were first in line to be able to apply and open a cannabis dispensary in New York State. Unfortunately, that system is going through a lot of challenges right now. There have been lawsuits. There's been a massive slowdown. So the state only has about 20 dispensaries that are even open at this stage, and it's causing a big backlog. But the point of those programs is to really help those populations who have been impacted by the war on drugs, by unfair policy and harsh policies, to benefit from being in the industry now, because it takes a lot to be successful in the industry. We certainly have not made it easy. It's very expensive. The state-by-state challenges are all different, time, capital intensive, and business acumen, which for a lot of people, even if you've been successful in other industries, coming into cannabis doesn't necessarily mean you'll automatically be successful, because it's so highly regulated and regulated in different ways that it's more akin to, the web of pharma and alcohol, but combining all of them together, because there's no blueprint really. We're learning and adjusting as we go along. So there are a range of programs there. Unfortunately, we don't have one yet that I think Akwasi and I would say that's the gold standard program. We were hoping that for New York, but it's seeing its own challenges, and we just think it's important that regardless of the fact that they haven't necessarily been overly successful yet, it's critical to have social equity programs established at the beginning of legalization for any state, because that at least gives you the opportunity to keep adjusting it and modifying and making it better. But if you think that you're going to legalize and then eventually introduce social equity, it'll just never happen. So it has to be part of the DNA of what's happening in policy and regulations. Otherwise, it's just not going to be happening. And we think it is critical that it does happen, because we think we owe that to all the communities that have been impacted by this. And granted, we, as a lot of people sitting here today, aren't the ones who made those decisions. We have the opportunity to make it right, or at least try to start the steps in the right direction for these people in these communities to shift where they've been stuck for a very long time.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Tahira, cannabis is called the gateway drug. Why is it called the gateway drug?
Well, the opposing view to what we have is that it's a gateway drug to other harder drugs. So the assumption is that if you start with cannabis and then you move on to other things like cocaine, heroin, you name it. We say that it is a gateway drug, but we think that it's a gateway to the criminal justice system. So many people who have engaged with cannabis, who are people of color or lower income, their interaction has led them to jail, while largely white populations who have had the same interactions have not landed in jail or haven't served any time or have any type of record. So we very much view it as a way that cannabis was utilized in a way to be a gateway to the criminal justice system.
I can see that point very much so. I have to ask you a question, Tahira, about the history of cannabis. I know that the Native Americans did use something. Did they use cannabis in their, when they did their ritual, and, the society at that time didn't like it? Because THC, cannabis, is natural. It's a natural grown product. It's not manufactured.
Right, absolutely. And we talk about this for both the U.S. For Native Americans and Canada for indigenous populations. Akwasi speaks about this often, that in the policy that was written for Canada in particular, indigenous populations were only mentioned once. But we do know that cannabis and other natural products, natural remedies have been used by Native American populations, by indigenous populations, and a range of other things around the world, like when you think about opium or even tobacco. The way that they were used was much more in a sacred, ritualistic kind of way. It wasn't used as a drug the way that we term it today. And so there have been some instances where Native American populations are actually able to get to the front of the line, if you call it, with licenses in different states because of that, being also penalized for having affiliations with cannabis. And so when you look, the dispensary opportunities or grow opportunities, there have been some, but they really do fall into that category of populations that have been persecuted for having cannabis affiliation.
I'll tell you what, folks, and this is the honest truth. I always wanted to try it in a tea because I can't inhale it. Mm-hmm. I can't smoke it because of my lungs. I know they had the gummies, but I always wanted to try it in a tea to see if it would help my migraines and help me with my anxiety. But like I said, it's really difficult to be able to afford a medical marijuana. It's almost to her that the government forces people to get it illegally because they can't afford to pay the high price, going to the doctor, getting the card, and paying the rates. Now, folks, don't know what it is on the street. Never bought marijuana. I only know from my sister from the 70s. It was $5 back then, and I'm talking early 70s. And, and of course now with the fentanyl, I wouldn't even trust going to get it on the street because it could be laced with something else. But I just think that they should make, this is my opinion, folks, when you see people suffer, whether it's through the justice system not being fair or they're suffering from a disease, and if you believe in your gut that marijuana would help them and you can't have it, of course people are going to buy it illegally. They're going to take that chance, I think, because they don't want to see their loved ones suffer. And, I'm go off on a tangent here. Why should people have to suffer? Why do people have to suffer because they can't obtain something? And again, this is my opinion to her and the folks listening. Big Pharma doesn't make any money off of marijuana. They make money off of painkillers.
Right.
And I think that's where you have also a political, I guess you could call it political play here, that the pharmaceuticals won't be making the money. Sure, throw someone a Percocet or whatever drug, and to me, my opinion, folks, that's more harmful than having cannabis. I really wished that, I could have had that. The drugs, and I won't mention them, that my husband took caused horrible side effects. horrible. And then the caregiver feels guilty for giving those horrible drugs. I would have felt better giving my husband cannabis, and I'm sure thousands of other people would too. I love the work you and Akwasi are doing.
Thank you.
I give you a lot of kudos. I think it's very brave too, because people, I don't know, they might look down. I know, why do they want this, legalized? Why are they doing this? But you know what, folks? Read the book. And not only read the book, I want you to Google Tahira Rehmatullah and Akwasi Owusu-Bempah. I want you to Google them. I want you to hear them speak. And I think you'll, with an open mind, have an open mind, and I think you will be motivated to feel the same way. I digress.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
You are welcome. I could talk to you for hours, Tahira. How does somebody get involved? I would love to put in your nonprofit and the blog if you would allow me to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the link, sure.
Yeah, so people can find me through LinkedIn and Akwasi as well, and the organization Last Prisoner Project is lastprisonerproject.org, but you can also find it through my pages as well.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Tahira, for coming on today. You are the woman. You definitely are the woman. I love speaking to people who are passionate about their work. And from hearing Akwasi on TED Talks, I know he is also very passionate about what he does. And I didn't even get into the Canada part, because Akwasi is up in Canada, and they also have racial injustice up there also with their laws that Akwasi is trying to change. And I just think that it's a wonderful work that you both are doing. And thank you for writing your book and sharing it with me today on Chatting with Betsy. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's been a great conversation, and I really appreciate your interest.
Oh, you're welcome. Where can people find your book, Tahira?
Anywhere wherever you like to buy your books. We were published through MIT Press, so you can go to the website to find all the different locations. But we always say go to your local bookstore. They should have it, and if they don't, they can get it. And then we're also, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all those places.
Okay, thank you. Folks, I can't even talk right now. You heard today Tahira Rehmatullah. She is co-author with Akwasi Owusu-Bempah and Tahira Rehmatullah, Waiting to Inhale, Cannabis Legalization and the Fight for Racial Justice. I highly recommend buying this book. And I just want people to get involved. And not only get involved, but don't judge people. Don't judge people who have been arrested for selling marijuana. I'm not talking about the hard drugs like fentanyl, folks. I'm not talking about that. But when you are desperate, I'm speaking from my own experience, and no, I didn't buy marijuana from that. When you're desperate for your loved one to get relief from pain or agitation, some people might risk getting arrested to help their loved one. That's how deep love is, folks. These people should not be arrested. People should not be going to jail to give their loved one relief from pain. And I won't go on a tangent on that, but I'm very strong and very passionate about that. I feel medical marijuana should be easily accessible and less expensive. I think insurance should cover it. Maybe eventually they will. Maybe not in my lifetime, but maybe it will. I would like to see it covered. Why not? And I think that we should help these people that were charged unfairly, serving time unfairly. I think we should help them set up a legal marijuana shop. You know what? Have it like they do in Colorado or California. Have a coffee shop, and you can buy the marijuana of your choice, cannabis of your choice, whatever name you want to refer to it. And I think that would be a great idea as far as I'm concerned, but that's my opinion. And I just want to thank everyone for listening. And if you don't already subscribe to Chatting with Betsy, it is free on Spotify, Spreaker, iHeart, YouTube, just to name a few. And please read the blog that Jeanne White Station Manager writes. All the information will be in the blog about Tahira and Akwasi. And I also want to thank Lillian Cauldwell, who's CEO of Passion World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. Thanks for listening. Please share the show to help other people. I like to help other people, and that's why I do my show. I want to help people. I want people to know about resources. And Tahira and Akwasi are great resources. I didn't know about them before. I know about them now. And I highly recommend everyone, just looking them up. Folks, yeah, I'm a child of the 60s and 70s, so I grew up with, marijuana, people doing marijuana all the time. But, it was more like a recreational drug back then. And it wasn't have a medical side back then, but now it does. And I really feel strongly passionate that we need to help people that are in pain. We really do. Nobody should have to suffer with their pain. Whether they have cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, they should not have to suffer with their symptoms and pain. And don't judge people who give it to their loved ones because they're helping them. They're not giving it to them to hurt them, but to help them. And that's just how I feel. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, so please be kind, shine your light bright, because we sure need it. And this is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy, Passionate World Talk Radio. Thanks for listening, and I'll chat with you again soon. Bye-bye now.